Have you ever done a podcast, Nils?
Not that I remember.
In your 20 years?
No, a podcast. I mean, I've been filmed and interviewed on camera a lot, but not really not in a dedicated podcast format.
Zaha's known globally, right, and for its design, and actually known by a lot of people around what they're doing around AI. And obviously, from an AI discussion point, this is why it's quite good, because everyone's talking about it. But you seem to be quite ahead of the game.
Yeah, we are in the first meters of a long race.
Yeah. AI is a hot topic going around the AEC industry at the moment, with AI tools being adopted across the globe. Designs that used to take weeks can now be designed in minutes. AI tools and models are shaping layouts, optimizing structures, even producing renders, all with a single prompt. There are now thousands of AI tools at the fingertips of architects and designers. Some say this is the future. Others think it's the beginning of the end of creative authorship. So what's really happening? Is AI here to enhance the role of an architect? Is this the start of a new creative era, or slow erosion of design intuition? Today, we're speaking to someone who's not only part of this shift, he's leading it. Welcome to the AEC Innovators Circle, a podcast designed to explore the leading trends, topics, and events shaping the architecture, engineering, and construction industry. Here, we speak to the boldest minds who are redefining what's possible and driving the future of the industry. Today, we're diving into the most exciting and transformative topics in our industry, AI in architecture. I'm thrilled to be joined by someone whose work quite literally bends the boundaries of design, technology, and imagination. It could only be Nils Fischer, Director at Zaha Hadid Architects, a firm globally celebrated for its boundary-pushing visionary designs. Over the past 2 decades, Neil has been the forefront of Zaha's most ambitious work, from the Eli and Edith Broad Art Museum in Michigan to the jaw-dropping Nanying International Youth Center in China. But beyond iconic buildings, Nils is also a leader in the digital evolution of architecture. He's one of the founding forces behind Code, Zaha's computational design research group, where he and his team explore how AI and advanced computation can unlock entirely new creative frontiers. Nils, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Karl.
Good to have you. Well, I thought we'd start with going back to sort of 2006, 2007, when you found ZHA Code, and pretty much what was the vision behind it? Why was it started?
I think it started out of a very pragmatic requirement. It was less in a vision than just kind of dealing with the situation that we found. It's because at that time already we built our own tools, because simply what we wanted to do wasn't quite possible with what, let's say, AEC software makers would think we would need and what we could buy off the shelf. And quite early we started to write little kind of tools, little code, snippets of code, little routines to primarily handle geometry, rationalize it, and also make designs feasible. Okay. And that was messy, right? Because architects are not programmers, and we realized that we started to pile up quite vital but totally undocumented and unstructured code. Okay. Just in the course, and it's all self-trained, right? So you would kind of just get resources off the internet and somewhat try to solve a problem. And then we realized that we needed to urgently institutionalize that, because construction projects can take anything from like 2 to 10 years. Yeah. So you need to be able to maintain and keep your tools alive. And it really started as a documentation project where we just said, okay, we need resource that looks at what we are doing here and tries to systemize it. And that was really when we said, okay, we need to create a dedicated position for that. And that was our first dedicated hire for, well, what probably, if you generalize it, would be research and software development. Okay. And we then went on from first looking at what are the tools that people build, to then see what are the popular ones. So we started to measure like what are kind of frequent problems that we're trying to solve, because everyone kind of with every project try to reinvent the wheel, and that's of course not so efficient. And then it's good to make mistakes, but only if you learn from them. And that also means that you need to somehow review that. And we then started to improve and accelerate and refine tools for problems that we would commonly run into, and then ultimately do research into what else we could perhaps address better with computational tools, and that then grew organically. So we then had a branch since kind of earliest days that was trying to look at projects and fixing problems that they found, and then another branch that would do speculative work on on or hypothesizing how we could further improve what we are doing and what we are designing using computational methods.
Wow. So can I ask, was it the architect's mindset? Because, you said that they're not coders, right? So, but was it a need and drive? Was it a particular group of people that came into that said, look, we're going to learn code, we're going to adopt code? Or how was it their mindset that had to change? Or was it you thought, this is the future that we need to grasp together as an architectural practice?
No, it's complete grassroots development. I was one of them. I'm still consider myself as an architect. So it was just us trying to hack into problems, really. And quite interestingly, at the time already, computer software was quite dominant already. So by the time I joined more than 20 years ago, the office was already paperless, but in a very kind of CAD 1.0 way, that we would design on screen, that we would use software to manage our projects. What then changed is that in parallel to developing a theory about how you could contextualize architecture, it's something that has to do with kind of advanced technology from parametric design, but we then also looked into what that means then for the design of buildings and the design language, which we then our principal then developed a theory around this, which is called parametricism. So how parametric design and the malleability of data and shape can inform style and language. Yeah, so there was a whole theory around that. We then built the tools to bring that together. So there was a very interesting convergence of this emergent theory of the tools that everyone already brought in, which was primarily animation software. Because funny enough, since I can think, even at universities, architects, at least the architects that I worked with and myself, we wouldn't use AEC software to design our buildings. We would primarily use stuff that comes from the movie industry, like from creative industries, because the interfaces are much more intuitive.
Right.
But then along the way, we would also, of course, generate all kind of problems that you would then have to resolve when you want to make things documentable and constructible, and that's why we developed a lot of early tools. And it was this kind of intersection between, let's say, emergent theory, emergent software skills, or improving software skills, particularly amongst kind of young architects, and the feasibility of compute becoming tangible. Yeah. So before that, remember at university, my first graphics workstation were Silicon graphics machines. They were kind of the price of a house each, and we had huge sponsorship to make all of that happen. That's totally unfeasible in an industry with very little overheads, right? So, like a car development budget is perhaps $2-3 billion. Yeah. If you develop a plane, it's more like 20 or 30 billion. Yeah. Your R&D overhead per project, and of course you can invest into a lot of compute and engineering. Like, architects only do one-offs, right? And then an architecture project construction volume is maybe like, I don't know, 5 million to 100 million on a good day. So it's orders of magnitudes lower. Still, we want to afford the same tools. And that's only something that kind of emerged about 20 years ago when NVIDIA pushed OpenGL hardware acceleration into the PC market. So it was this kind of funny intersection, and that's where we all of a sudden said, okay, now this guy's the limit, and let's see how far we can get kind of using computers to explore, making our designs more efficient, but also making them more interesting and exploiting the computer to develop new formal ideas.
Amazing. You mentioned two, I suppose, important topics there of how you started. One, you hired someone, right, to start bringing that code together and bring those elements together. The second thing you mentioned around training on data sets, right? Now, being in the industry, a lot of people haven't started that governance or starting that AI team, right? And the other thing is that people are also trying to figure out which data, because you can train a lot of models on the wrong types of data. You can train a lot of models that aren't giving the output you want. So how do you start with that in the very early stages, right? And we're talking nearly 20 years ago now.
Yeah, obviously 20 years ago AI wasn't really a thing. Like I would say 15 years ago, like terms like big data and then eventually machine learning emerged, and we tried all of that and started there already. So I think in hindsight we are kind of doing what is now considered to be on the fringe of AI perhaps 10 years ago. But we were lucky because and I think there are a lot of kind of happy accidents almost that happened, but I think they are not necessarily a happy accident if you look back why they happened, because we always afforded an overhead for experimentation, right? So we always had a team that was looking after our data and trying to systemize it, and that became very useful when we then started to train our own first AI models. But there are things I think that are quite common in architectural practices. So one of the most important data sets when we started to explore generative AI, and that's particularly Stable Diffusion, and then training our own LoRa models. So that's low rank adaptation models that you put on top of a general model that you can, like, maybe some background. Midjourney is an open source AI project where you can download a kind of worldview data set that is a generic data set trained on billions of images, but you can then refine it by putting your own models on top with your own data. And in order to do that, you need tagged data. So you have to have a meaningful set of images, you have to have a meaningful set of keywords, and you have to have them linked. And we were just lucky because we had a massive in-house image database with in excess of 100,000 photos, and we had a team, that was our press team, that was since years tagging those images so they would find them. And we then had our computational design research group that was very quick in just connecting this database to the Stable Diffusion API, and that took about a week of experimentation, and we had our first working model that we then kind of refined over now what is probably now years. Yeah.
And what impact did you see at that early stage? So you mentioned, like you said, Midjourney, you adopted that as an open source tool, right? But then
that's Stable Diffusion. Midjourney is not really open source, but
sorry,
but it's similar. It's very similar.
But I suppose Midjourney from a text to image sort of software, right?
That's the generative AI, like text to image. Yeah.
Exactly. So, but you had thousands of images like you could upload on it. So you adopted that image, and what sort of impact do you see? Because that was that. I think when we look at when selecting an AI tool, you want to look at the impact it has on the business, right? And so one thing I would say is that's a great example. You adopted it, and it's widely adopted across Zaha now, right? Purely maybe because you saw impact, so speed of conceptual design or images or those sort of things, right? So it'd be interesting to see how you measure success when you adopt a tool, but also what impact did you see in the early stages?
Yeah, I mean, I mean, maybe first part of the question, success is measured simply by adoption. So you can, and I think this is another part where the culture that we have developed through being happy to experiment turned out to be a good conductor for adopting new technology quickly, because we are very bottom up and grassroots when it comes not only to the way we do our design. So we invest a lot into training. Like, we're very active in academia. Our founders have been very active in academia for decades. So everyone comes kind of, in a way, pre-infused in what it is that we are trying to do. But then the design development, but then also the choice of tools is grassroots. We have a total software zoo, and unless it's outrageously expensive or comes with a massive legal challenge, we pretty much allow and adopt every tool that our team proposes to do their work, and it's really about the outcome, not really about us prescribing the tool to do the work, because that would limit the solution space. And hang on, let me try to bring that point home to your question, which was. Sorry, I got lost on a tangent.
Well, almost measuring success, but also
measuring success. Exactly. It's about the adoption of tools, right? So we frequently have very similar tools, even to a degree redundant, competing. We simply measure their uptake amongst our audience, and our audience is our teams in the office, right? And any solution that we speculatively invest into then gets kind of thrown into our internal marketplace, and if people adopt it, then we believe it's a successful tool. And if no one looks at it, it may have been a case of happy engineering and perhaps speculating into the off. So yes, I mean, it's measuring adoption in projects, and essentially it's very similar to let's say the virtually free offerings you find in the internet, which are not, because they're all competing for your time and your attention, and it's time spent using those tools. I think that's the most important success criterion, because we still believe that each project architect or each project leader is motivated to do the best possible project with the highest efficiency, and we just look at how they then adopt the tools. And sometimes I also look at myself, because I still do projects.
yeah. So speaking of tools, right? I saw a recent publication. There's now, I think, over 1,000 tools on the market, right? And I know me and you've talked around tools a lot, but finding the right tools and the correct tools. But there's no major tool dominating the market right now. So it'd be interesting to see your thoughts on tools, if you have any advice for, I suppose, anyone listening around, or any firms listening around, any tools you should adopt, or you're seeing as a major use case across the industry, from your point of view.
And I think maybe going back a bit because we jumped very quickly from, let's say, the early days of looking big data and now generative AI. And Gen AI only really started in 2022 when DALL-E 2 came out.
Yeah.
When all of a sudden everyone saw these very impressive, very realistic images. Yeah, but that's only a subset of what you can do with AI. That's AI, that's generating images, and that's very, let's say, seductive on the surface because it gives you immediate kind of very realistic results. But you're only ever interacting at the level of a derivative. I mean, you're using AI to generate an image of architecture, but not to generate the architecture behind it. And I think in the long run, the way more interesting tools are those that generate the architecture or the project that you can then generate an image from. So shifting the interaction from the derivative to the actual subject matter that you're interacting with, which in the case of architects is hierarchy, order, topology of elements. And you can't do that with an image generating AI. But that, of course, was the moment when everyone kind of thought, okay, now it's getting serious. Now we get kind of tangible results from it. And that was quite a game changer. So in that regard, there are only a handful of models generating these images, but then there is a whole layer of tools on top of them to make them more manageable, to kind of combine them, and they are really emerging left, right, and center. So you find a lot of startups that would take, for example, an open source AI like Stable Diffusion, and I believe that's even what's behind Adobe's Firefly.
Yeah.
Take that and adopt it for a certain niche or a certain market, like they would train their own LoRa's. But you can do that yourself. So I think the first thing is to understand the technology and take some time and perhaps just start by downloading your own instance of Stable Diffusion and just play with it, because that helps you a lot to kind of see how it works.
So just on that point, you said play with it, right? So
yeah,
how do you play with it? How do you Zaha's built on, like you said, people trying tools, giving the freedom to do it.
Yeah.
How do you empower your guys to do that?
And I think probably that's a very good question, because I think what I would rather recommend more than a tool set right now is, because by the time someone listens to it, it's already outdated, is perhaps recommending a technique.
Yes.
And the technique is to make headroom for experimentation, right? Particularly in an area where on a time where things are erupting almost daily in terms of toolkits, workflows, etc. I think it's very important to reserve time to just stay informed. Yeah, and what we do is we kind of give those who are interested the time to do that, and we then collate the results. So the interesting bit is, maybe we have a computational design research group, and this is about code geometry, computational methods. We have 5 other teams in our technology cluster that look at other aspects of our work using very similar means and methods. But funny enough, we have no dedicated AI team. That's a true horizontal throughout the business, right?
Oh, okay.
So we're not saying like there are 3 guys now in charge of AI, because they might miss something. So we invite everyone who's interested in the subject matter to come together and discuss it. And interestingly, now we have a horizontal that even includes departments that had nothing to do with our architectural production in the past. So we now have a data team in our finance department that is exchanging methods with our computational designers. And we're now bringing all of our data into a unified infrastructure. And we have finance data kind of living next to project data, because we want to be able to access it using same tools. So we now have groups that had nothing to do on a workflow level, exchanging techniques. Yeah? And that leads to very interesting things that like we figured out that statistical data analysis software like Power BI that our finance department uses is great also for kind of rationalizing facades. So we're using finance tools to rationalize and kind of identify families between elements and build dashboards for architects to control the data on their projects, and vice versa. So we have this kind of very interesting emergent AI horizontal now, and we foster that by just making time for that and creating fora for exchange. And then also as a business, then helping people to test and onboard and explore tools, because that costs money. Yeah. So I think the number one thing that is very important, particularly for small practices, to keep in mind is there is no such thing as a free lunch. I think there's Milton Friedman coming up with that quote. So all of these, a lot of the kind of virtually free offerings basically are based on you giving your data away, and reading a bit into how these tools work and what they do with your data will very quickly lead you to the conclusion that it's worth to at least invest into the basic paid for tier, because that gives you at least contractually data privacy, and as an IP generating business, I think that's key. So once you're there, you're then at a point where anyone that wants to or who wants to to explore something new needs to get time and a little kind of financial allocation for their tools and for doing so. And what we ask in return in the business is, then share the results and make sure that everyone learns from that. And it's that technique that allowed us to very quickly and very look into the emergent tools that we see popping up left, right, and center very, very broadly, and then also very quickly identify what works and what doesn't.
You mentioned IP and control and I suppose security in a sense. Is that the way I see it? You could walk around the streets here in London, right, and everyone's IP is everywhere because you can look at the buildings, you see how they're designed. So when you talk around what to protect and the freedom to give you, do you have certain guidelines when it comes to AI that you come across the practice around? Don't put this in. You can put this in. So images, for example, I can Google 100 of your buildings today, but I can't Google your code and things that you maybe protect. So do you have any?
Some of it is open source.
Okay, yes, yeah.
Some of it.
Yeah. So what? I suppose how do you guideline the IP and protection of that?
Yeah, I think it's just being smart and being aware. I think there are two very important paradigms that we're also trying to push into development, because it's a problem that is older than AI. You have the emergence of the vendor cloud about 10 years ago. So there are two big companies in our sector, both starting with an A. They love to pull your data into their clouds, and that's where the problem starts. So already since a decade, we have developed quite an acute sensitivity for separating our data from the tools.
Okay.
And we simply follow through on that with AI tools. So where possible, we self-host models. Stable Diffusion is a good example. There's Mistral, so you can also self-host language models. Of course, there come certain limitations with it. So in an ideal world, you self-host the AI when it's interacting with your data. The second thing is, if you then train your own LoRa's or models, never share those, because then you're giving your own black box away. Just make sure that stays on your side of things. And then quite often, of course, when you really want to interact with powerful tools, so for example, Cursor is a fantastic, or Windsor, for example, is another one that, like, our coding skills just explode. At that point, of course, you are connected to a cloud, but then just be smart and buy the bloody basics here and make sure that at least they on paper guarantee you that you stay in control of your data. And I think this is also key when now testing all of these emergent offerings, because a lot of them are repackaging the 4 or 5 big base models and also sometimes very smartly recombining them. But it's always worth to rather than now moving all of your data into their product, is to see whether you can't have an API interacting with it, or just kind of exchange the minimum viable data set, because also you don't want to invest and then get locked in a product that might be outdated in a year's time. So it's simply kind of developing a bit of an awareness for where your data sits and how that is under your control, and how you can interact with a tool on, let's say, a minimum viable exchange basis.
Okay.
Yeah.
Correct.
That requires some practice, but again, that's why I think what I said first is important. Just read into the subject matter, build a sandbox, play with it to start to understand a bit how your data correlates with the tools with the tool that you're using.
Awesome. I do want to cover AI maturity a little bit. So there are the tools out there, which is great. And you mentioned a method or to actually adopt some of those tools and how to use them. And so you've a bit around your, I suppose, Zaha's core to allow people the freedom. The other thing is also the long-term strategy, where a lot of people are now trying to build large data sets based off 10, 15 years of projects, whether they're designs, whether they're project plans, so they can start predicting cost models, things like that. How are you approaching that side of AI as well?
I think data, and I think that's a good point, because I think if there's one underlying theme across all of the different types of AI that you can already use and that you will be able to use in the near future, is they need good data to work off. And that's the old principle, garbage in, garbage out. So I think in any case, it is well invested time to structure your data well. and to put it in a form that where it becomes retrievable, right? So what we're doing, for example, right now, we are building a data lake architecture. I mentioned that a bit earlier, where all of our data, be it images, project data, finance data, like any form of data we have, sits in a kind of unified data storage platform. So we can very quickly access and correlate data, and that requires to consolidate a lot of formally isolated data pools. That's a lot of work. Yeah? So the older your practice is, the more overhead you have, and the more isolated data pools you have, the more redundancy you have. So investing into that housekeeping early to get to one big consistent data platform that is ideally live and telling one version of the truth is extremely helpful when you then want to connect that data to the API of an AI application.
Just on that, are you hiring business analysts, data analysts for that sort of stuff? Is it how you get into that structure? Because like you said, it's not easy, especially as maybe some companies have been around 25, 30, 40 years where data's all over the place and they want to utilize it. Are you hiring specific roles to help with that?
Yeah, we have kind of emergent roles that become more and more data savvy. For example, in our finance and accounting department, we now have 2 data analysts.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
But that's kind of emergent because the software got more complex, and then we started to migrate to bigger software projects, to bigger software tools, particularly for accounting as the practice grows. And then all of a sudden you're facing problems like database migration, and then very quickly you're in the domain of, okay, once I'm doing that, I might as well look at everything else. So that's emergent. So we now have a small kind of data analyst team in our finance department, but they also work kind of across the business now.
Yep. And
then for projects like, for example, the migration of all of our different storage pools into one data lake, that's then a project where we get specialist consultants in for. Correct. So I think everything that is business as usual in long-term strategy, we hire in. And for then specific projects which are kind of heavy lifting or kind of have a very kind of confined time frame, we then rely on a network of consultants that are tasked to do that. It's also way more efficient. Yeah.
Great. And the other thing, we're not standing still, right? So you're trying to train it off old bits, but we're seeing emergence of obviously digital twins, IoT come into place around, using live data across the project timeline. So taking things like vibration, temperature, utilizing that live data, but then bringing that back into the model, the design process, and then simulating that in some sort of digital twin format. Are you seeing much of that? Are you looking at much of that from the combining the 3, I suppose, buzzwords of IoT, AI, and digital twins, or?
Yeah, we do some research on that. So we have in our current office, we have a bunch of sensors. We have, for example, occupancy sensors. We have temperature and carbon dioxide sensors. So we try to see what we can do or what we can learn when we look at that data. We then have a team it's our analytics and insight team. It's also short AI, but has a different focus. We then try to learn how we can design better buildings by seeing how people use that. But there's a fundamental problem in AEC. It's 2 things. It's the length of a project life cycle. Yeah. So if you design and build, let's say, an office building in 5 years, by the time it's occupied, you have data. It's maybe another 3 years down the line. So it's 8 years later. So you may be then able to take that info, transpose it, and use it for the purpose of a new project. And the second problem is the contractual structure of the AEC industry, because particularly in Europe, the designer is one layer removed from production. So it's not like in aerospace or in automotive where the dev team kind of sits next door to the production and they have an immediate feedback cycle. And that's like you have pre-series runs, for example, in automotive, where you can then adjust the design where it gets in the way of production. And that's terribly difficult in the AEC industry because we are not design and build contractors, right? We are architects, and quite often the challenge is to get the information feedback from the contractor. And then also quite often the challenge is to get the information feedback from the end user, which might, in our case particularly, we are mostly building the public domain, cultural buildings, big public infrastructure. So most of our clients are government bodies like municipalities, states, and getting data back from them in a processable format is near impossible, right? So sourcing data for product optimization is a challenge in AEC, because you kind of have 2 breaks. Like you're not the one running the production, and you're not the one using the product. That's why we use our own office that we can control to collect some of that data. We tap into data sources where we find them, but we could do much more with digital twins if we would have better data better real world data from both the construction process and usage throughout the lifespan of a project. Technology is there.
Great. So I have a bit, I suppose, you have a very positive light on AI, and it's not, I suppose, to be controversial, not always shared by everyone across the industry that I speak to from an AI perspective. Now, I don't know if you saw the latest study for the AIA, American Institute of Architects, that it's very 50-50 on some people are excited by AI, some people are very concerned with the adoption of AI in the industry. And a lot of it's around, if AI is doing a lot of design and helping with a lot of process, and machines are making some prompts, etc. Where does the design authority stop? Now, I know it's an interesting topic to discuss, but it'd be great to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's funny because I talk a lot about AI, and I hear a lot of the concerns, but they very much remind me of the feedback that I got when I was lecturing about parametric design 20 years ago.
Right.
Yeah, so that was not AI, that was just connecting parameters to make smart design decisions. And the same question was like, is that now going to kind of substitute the architect? And the answer is always no. It will change the way we work, but I think it will change it for the better. And my prediction is, and this might sound very counterintuitive, that we will see a shift from the value add of an architect from production and documentation to creation. Right, because the one thing that in AI, and I think this is another reason why I can just urge everyone to start and collect own experience, because you will find out that what it's particularly good is doing or repeating self-similar tasks. Yeah, so what we saw kind of with classical CAD and BIM was automation of straight repeatable tasks. What we now see is the ability or a high efficiency in repeating self-similar tasks and patterns, and that's mostly relevant when you look into downstream productions. I mean, which architects likes doing door schedules? I don't know a single one. Yeah, or spec writing, or like everything that has to do with correlating standard catalogs to your specific application. That's where I think AI, and that has nothing to do with the nice images that you can generate. I think that's where AI will have a massive impact on our productivity. And that means it liberates me from doing all of that, and I can focus on better design. Yeah? Amazing. And then if you really start to experiment with image generation, the funny thing is you demystify it quite quickly. Yeah, it's a nice idea browser. Yeah, but if you then try to pin it down, have you ever tried to jot down a dream or to sketch something that you have dreamt, like after you wake up? I mean, I think architects do that. Like you dream of something, you try to sketch.
I haven't done it yet. I'll give it a go.
Try it, yeah. But it's funny because even writing it down, it's near impossible. And that's if you really look into what you generate when you use Gen AI for images, it's kind of what you get. And we did experiments. Like we said, I mean, we were lucky, right? When the first models came out in 2022, we had early access to an artist who was part of OpenAI's pre-beta program. And we played with it, and we were lucky because the internet was beautifully pre-trained on our images, because we have the biggest Instagram account of all architects. So our images were in those models already without even training them. We got very good Zaha buildings. Yeah. But then we said, okay, let's find out how good they are, and we try to remodel them, right? And it's getting spatial consistency is near impossible. Like you might then get into the building, but you will never get out again, right? It's like modeling a client model. So very early on, comparably, I mean that's now 3 years ago, we figured out that okay, looks nice, but it's not really architecture, right? So I think what everyone is talking about is like those seductive images. They are probably having the least impact on production. And I say that where we already see efficiencies is in automation, or in the ability to automate things that we couldn't automate yet. And I think that means we can start to spend more time on making designs better. And we have tools that allow us to iterate quicker over problems, right? I mean, we're not engineers, we're not mathematicians. There's always more than one solution to a problem in architecture, because there's an aesthetic component. It's negotiating apples and pears, really. That's what architects do. And we can simply now, through AI, afford a much larger number of iterations, and we can iterate over problems much quicker. And in my experience, that always gets you to a better solution. So I think what we will see is more time for design, and the better affordability of more iterations. So I predict an increase in design quality, and I believe that there's an appreciation and also a demand for that in the market. Because if you look at architecture at a global scale, I mean, this is another thing, right? I mean, of course, if you are living in a first world country and you are in a saturated market, it may get a bit challenging if there's a new technology that others adapt quicker. Yeah, it leads to a shift. But if you look at it at a global scale, where cities are growing, it's like they're completely remote from like those. There are regions which are very remote from the sophistication and the technology that we can use, for example, here in London, in England, or in European or American cities. Yeah. So over the next 20 years, the planet needs new cities for more than 2 billion people. Yeah, and most of them will happen. They will happen with or without us, with or without the involvement of an engineer in growth regions which are not first world regions. Yeah, so sub-Saharan Africa alone has a demand of 650 or new cities for 650 million people over the next coming 20 years. So by making technology more feasible and the processing of sophisticated engineering solutions cheaper or faster, you make it cheaper and make it more accessible. Yeah. So I predict that through AI, we will be, as a discipline, as architects, will be having a much bigger impact on a global scale. I mean, there are no real figures for that, but for example, if you look at cities like Mexico City, like there are estimates around like that the number of buildings or the share of buildings that an architect has been involved in building, is perhaps 2.5%. Yeah. And the rest is just stuff put together by people saying, okay, I build a shed with a roof on top, and we have whole cities that kind of look like that, and that's not very resource or material efficient, right? So I think there is still a huge scope for our discipline to broaden its footprint, and I believe that the key limiter, or the two key limiters in that process, are the affordability of architectural services. So I think in order for architecture to stay meaningful, it needs to become cheaper, and AI can help with that. And the accessibility of knowledge, and also there AI is great. Yeah. So if you have a well-trained AI model, it can already give you a good average background to, or in a good average solution to, or at least a hint to a good average solution for almost everything. Yeah. So in a way, a well-trained AI model is also a great means of transporting knowledge to where it's required. Yeah. If you then find a smart model behind it to manage the IP and perhaps license that knowledge, there's even a new business model, particularly for creators, to be developed. It's a bit like in the music industry that shifted from selling CD copies that you cannot like write protected CDs to now just streaming stuff online. And this business model has to transform along with it. It's a long way, but I think there's a huge potential to also bring knowledge that is now ring-fenced in the first world that is not growing anymore. I mean, like first world cities shrink, but we have kind of amassed all of that fantastic knowledge how to build sustainable and efficient and beautiful buildings, and we need to transport that knowledge to areas where it's actually needed. Yeah. And I think that's again where AI is a fantastic way to transport that knowledge. And I think that it can be equitable for those who generated that IP by simply kind of scaling or developing a business model that correlates the let's say the clicks on your IP with the effort that was involved in generating it. So I think it's about adapting to a new world, not necessarily about kind of giving up what you have done. So it will shift, it will change drastically, but I think it will be really, if you look at the potential impact of our discipline on what's going on the planet, it will be a change for the better.
No, I love the passion that comes with how AI is going to actually help the future growth of cities, the future adoption to help actually meet the global scale. I mean, I share this stat all the time. You know, I was born in 1991 where the population was just over 5 billion, and in 2060, so in my lifetime, it's going to be double, right?
Yeah.
And it's quite interesting that you mentioned around the future, right? So, and how AI is going to be a big shift to that. So the future is also, I suppose, students coming through their architectural practices now, right? And learning the industry, learning their design. Any advice to those on what should they be playing with, using some of your words, or anything they should start considering today to be, maybe start being ahead of the curve, you know, potentially to become an architect at Zaha or some of the world leaders?
I mean, of course, okay, that's two questions. I think the first bit is AI. So again, it changes so quickly, and that answer would have been a different one half a year ago. It will be a different one in a year's time. But as a student, if I would be now investing some time, I would look into MCP, that's Model Context Protocol, and that is essentially what's behind agent models. So a classical AI, a model that lives in a very kind of limited context. It lives the context of its training data set. Each prompt can be kind of referential in a good AI to what you've asked before, but it's isolated in a way. And the model context protocol allows you to move information and insights between different models. Yeah. And if you look at very kind of, or the last wave of kind of very powerful tools, that's agent models on top of very powerful models. Like Cursor is a good example, or Windsor for that purpose in the domain of coding. Like what Cursor does, it's allowing you to, or it's allowing you to use different language models for different purposes in your coding contexts. And you can do the same with geometry, for example. So there's an MCP plugin for Rhino, for example, that allows you to interact with your geometry using a language model. So I think combining apps, different language models, and their contexts is something that is huge. I mean, it doesn't solve architecture for you, but it's a very powerful and interesting and emergent thing to play with. And that's a nice thing when you're at university. It's not so long ago. It is, but it doesn't feel like it. Like you have the time to drill very deep in things and experiment with it, and then also hypothesize and do kind of like off-world projects. I mean, you don't have to be feasible as a student. You just have to explore a subject matter. And I think playing with language models in architecture and the model context protocol is something that I would wanting to spend my time doing as an architectural student right now. But then if you look at the general thing, is like, I think what is still very, very important is being able to judge the outcome. Yeah. I mean, there's this fantastic quote, I think it's only a year old, and it's by a corporate consultant, I forgot his name, but there's this fantastic line saying, mediocrity is now free with AI, but you still have to be able to judge, is it mediocre, is it better? So I think you cannot use AI as an architect without having the standard curriculum of good design education, knowing your history, knowing your masters, because you would want to be able to tell a mediocre generated product apart from something that is truly brilliant. Yeah? And it's that judgment that as an architect a client pays you for. Because with an AI you can generate thousands of derivatives, but we only have one world we live in, and you have to guide people to what is the best outcome of that. And that still requires you to be an expert and to be able to critically interrogate the outcome. I mean, because obviously, an AI can go wrong. Yeah, it's no precise science. But what is more important is to choose, and to conduct the process. Because what an AI allows you to do is to generate countless options, but you still have to filter them down and find the most meaningful, and then also be able to contextualize and justify your selection. So I think going ahead, as an architect, I mean, the kind of architect that I would want to be working with in my teams has an in-depth knowledge about the historical context, or the cultural context, sorry, it's better to say cultural context of that our works live in, and at the same time is able to use technology to then challenge that. But that has to be a conscious process, and you have to be able to verbalize why you made those choices. Yeah. And that will always remain relevant. So it doesn't alleviate students from building a kind of solid curriculum, and then also kind of honing their own design skills. Yeah. So I think it will not replace talent at all.
No, and I think
it will do away probably with bad designers.
Yeah, but I think you've kept it as a core here. AI is one of the most powerful tools to the industry, right? But it's still it's not going to replace the architect. The architect is the most important function at the core of this, right? But they need to understand how to use it properly, right? Yeah. But like you said, you need to know what mediocre and good is, right? And make sure it's working, and advising the client on which is the best to go through. I mean, we've covered a lot today, right? So I think I'm going to ask one sort of final question to you, is more around, so what's next for Zaha in the AI world? And where do you see, I suppose, the future and what's exciting about it in the next, we've talked a lot about the future and how AI is going to change it, but specifically to you guys on the next, say, 3 to 5 years.
Let me get my crystal ball out.
No, I mean, so how long's a piece of string question?
Yeah, it's moving so quickly, but I think, what is clear, we will keep exploring it. We will dedicate resource, and that's I think my general recommendation is make time for exploration. Yeah. Because I think what is clear, we're not living in static times. You will have to adapt your workflows. The recipe doesn't exist yet, and I think it's a phase where staying informed is very important in order to stay competitive. Yeah. For me, the next, or what we're already working on, is the use of language models to interact with architecture on the level of grammar. It's speculative to a degree because there is not so much data available. Image generation is nice, and that is probably something that is very accessible, but it has its clear limits because you can't interact with an image on the matter of topology or structure or order or hierarchy of elements. It just doesn't work. Yeah? Language models are fantastic too, that they understand grammar, they understand order, they understand logical connections. And one of the things that we are now since a while working on is seeing how far we can drive language models on the basis of the data that we've accumulated over the past decades. Since we are working digitally since 30 years, we have a ton of data on our servers. It's now going backwards and seeing, can we somehow structure that data to make it accessible? Can we start to train language models? And can we perhaps get a design predictor for conceptual designs whilst we edit? Yeah, and I think that is something that is potentially by orders of magnitude more powerful than generating images. Is to have a language model that understands the shape grammar of a building. But that's very early days because obviously the codified architectural shape description data that you find on the internet is a fraction of for example general language data that you find. So it's easier to train. It's still very complex, and that's also why there are only kind of 3, 4, 5 big models out there. It's still a big effort to train an AI on things like the billions, maybe millions of books that have been written in history. But trying to find amounts of data that are similar and similarly meaningful when it comes to architectural design descriptions, that's much harder. So we're having much less data to work with, but we still believe that by training models for very, very narrow contexts, we can actually get AI to work on a level that is telling us something about how we put things together and the order of things. And that's essentially what an architect does, right? If you look how an architect works, it's like the sketch is an abstraction. It's a very kind of it's a minimum viable subset of the information that you need to interact and define a problem. And that's also what you do in early conceptual stage when using modeling software. Yeah, so you work with a subset of the data. It's an abstract model, but it encompasses everything that is relevant to the project. And I think it's that level of information where AI will have a massive impact on, and that's what we're focusing on now in the next years, is to move away from, let's say, image generation to using AI for directly interacting with our architectural data sets.
Amazing. Great. Well, look, that's going to be super exciting. We'll have to have you on in a couple of years to review this, so we can play this back and see how we got on right.
How wrong I was, yeah.
Yeah, we can say that all didn't work. But Nils, firstly, thank you so much for joining us today. Your insights and what's going on at Zaha is very exciting. I'm personally excited to see the future, but look, hopefully it's been very useful for a lot of our listeners, both either your students or established practice around how you guys are approaching AI, your thoughts. But no, thank you very much for joining us. So
no pleasure. It was great fun being here. Thanks,
awesome.
Karl. Cheers.
Thank you for listening to number 1 of the AEC Innovators Circle podcast. And once again, thank you, Nils, for joining us on this first episode. Future episodes will bring more industry leaders talking about key trends going on, whether they're digital twins, sustainability, AI, and many other things going on around the world. I look forward to inviting our next guests and seeing you again soon.